Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 3 episode number 9 based on novel. So let's start. The three factions took turns to use the Dao Seeker Hall. Hence, every disciple under Lu Feng discovered the changes on the Alpha Origin wall when they arrived for the morning lessons on the next day. Everyone in the hall, including even Elder Lu Song, were dazed for quite some time. 6,743 breaths. Elder Lu Song sighed in amazement as he shook his head. The disciple called Ju Yuan really knew how to stir things up. To think that he would stir up such a sensation on his first day of training. On the first sash purple seat below, Lu Yang's haughty and pretty face was covered in astonishment as she gazed at the Alpha Origin wall, unable to stop herself from remarking, "This guy does have some ability." A disciple chuckled from the side and said, "I've heard that Ju Yuan has volunteered to be one of the 3 participants in the upcoming cave match." Lu Yang was taken aback by this information. Soon after, her red lips curled downwards as she disdainfully said, "I was just beginning to feel that he was not too bad. How did he suddenly become so rash and ignorant?" Ju Yuan's record of over 6,000 breaths was indeed quite a scare, but what did it mean? It would at most mean that Ju Yuan's cultivation progress in the Alpha Origin stage would be somewhat faster than normal. However, it should be known that there were plenty of treasures that could speed up one's cultivation progress. Others may not be able to match him in this aspect, but they could make up for it through other means. As such, the ability to bring back more Alpha Origin Qi only showed that Ju Yuan was not the average disciple, but it did not give him qualifications to do as he pleased. From what Lu Yang could see, Ju Yuan's actions were rather foolish. No matter how much Alpha Origin Qi you can bring back, you're still only a second layer Alpha Origin for now. In comparison, who do you think will be participating in the cave match? The most outstanding gold sash disciples of the 2 factions, of course. These were elites even amongst the 5th layer Alpha Origin stage. Even if Ju Yuan defeated the 4th layer Alpha Origin Lu Feng in the peak selection ceremony, even the latter would not have courage to interfere in such fights for the time being. All of these were the reasons why Lu Yang felt Ju Yuan's actions were truly foolish and reckless. Agreed. The disciple nodded in agreement, before he said, "I've also heard that numerous senior disciples under Elder Shen are quite unhappy about this affair, especially Cao Shi, because he's the one that Ju Yuan intends to replace." Cao Shi her. "I've heard that is quite good," remarked Lu Yang. Due to Ju Yuan's insistence, he ended up fixing a match with Cao Shi. They will fight in 4 days, and the winner will represent Elder Shen's faction during the cave match. I'm of the opinion that there was some dispute with regards to who would ultimately possess the Purple Genesis cave dwelling. Even if Elder Shen has high hopes of Ju Yuan, it still drew many objections from the other disciples. As such, Ju Yuan has no choice but to accept this duel, because according to the rules, only those that have participated will have the right to be allocated the reward. Lu Yang said, "Elder Shen's side already does not have a good chance of victory. With Ju Yuan as extra baggage, how can they possibly aim for the Purple Genesis cave dwelling?" The disciple chuckled and replied, "Perhaps they are hoping for a fluke. There's after all still 2 other participants. If they manage to win, it would be an overall victory even if Ju Yuan loses." Lu Yang's brows furrowed as she said, "If that is the case, he's really too shameless." She shook her head, the amazement from earlier due to Ju Yuan's record of over 6,000 breaths completely fading away. Looks like pushing Ju Yuan to Elder Shen is actually a good thing. If not, will be the ones others will be talking about. Never mind, they are the ones who will end up being humiliated. Let them do as they please. With these words, she gladly patted her full bosom as it swayed slightly. On the 3rd day, it was now Lu Hong's turn for morning lessons in the Dao Seeker Hall. Lu Hong merely cast a single glance at the Alpha Origin wall before withdrawing his gaze, his face as impassive as before. The other disciples also secretly sneaked glances, but did not break out into discussion, evidently already aware of this information. Below Lu Hong, the young man called Yuan Hong was seated on the purple sash first seat. He had a towering figure that made others feel a faint pressure, as if they were facing a mountain. Lu Hong's gaze swept downwards as he indifferently said, "Wei Yuxian, Feng Yu, Chen Ying." Upon hearing Lu Hong speak, 3 young men on the 3 closest gold mats respectfully responded. "Present." Lu Hong said, "The 3 of you shall participate in the upcoming cave match. Are all of you confident?" At the gold sash disciple first seat, Wei Yuxian, who wore black clothes, chuckled softly and answered, Teacher Lu need not worry, the gold sash disciples of Elder Shen's faction are nothing to be feared. He paused for a moment, before continuing, as for Zhu Yuan, I've heard that he will be contesting Cao Shi for the place of the final participant. We are not familiar with this person. He's merely a little clown, and there's no need to pay any attention to him. Since Shen Taiyuan's group wants to humiliate themselves, we'll give them as much humiliation as they want, said Lu Hong. Wei Yuxian nodded. After this matter was settled, Lu Hong turned his gaze towards Yuan Hong, his expression softening slightly as she said, Yuan Hong, the competition for the chief disciple position will be held at the end of the year. You must not fail. Yuan Hong opened his eyes, a sharp light surging within them as if they contained sword light. He gave a faint nod as he said, Don't worry Teacher Lu, the other two factions only have Ju Tai and Lu Yang. Although they are strong, they are still not my match. The position of chief disciple will definitely end up in my hands. His tone was calm, but it contained an unquestionable confidence. Lu Hong let out a satisfied chuckle. That's good. When you become the chief disciple, you will be qualified to learn the Omega Saint Spirit Art, and may even gain the qualifications to vie for one of the 10 Great Chosen spots in the future. At the mention of the 10 Great Chosens, the light in Yuan Hong's finally brightened for a moment, as if a fire was burning within them. From what he could see, the position of chief disciple was his to take whenever he chose to, and he did not face much competition. The other two factions were just too useless, and the disciples there too ordinary. The only ones who just barely made the mark were Lu Yang and Ju Tai, but neither posed much of a threat towards him. The reason why he had been willing to follow Lu Hong to St. Genesis Peak was because he would gain the right to practice one of the 7 arts, the Omega Saint Spirit Art, once he became the chief disciple of St. Genesis Peak. He had only been able to rank 3rd amongst the Sword Cometh Peak disciples. Without mentioning the first-ranked Kongxing, even the second-ranked had an edge over him, and had been able to suppress him from start to end. Even if Kongxing stepped down from his position as one of the 10 Great Chosens in the future, that ranked second guy would definitely replace the former. But most importantly, Peak Master Ling Jun greatly valued the latter. Hence, even if Yuan Hong stayed behind in Sword Cometh Peak, he would never have a chance to practice its ultimate technique. Yuan Hong's eyes lowered slightly, unable to accept this outcome. When I become the chief disciple of St. Genesis Peak in the future, master the Omega Saint Spirit Art, and join the ranks of the 10 Great Chosens, Peak Master Ling Jun, and the rest if you will understand that I, Yuan Hong, am not weaker than anyone else. In the depths of a particular cave dwelling, endless pure Genesis Chi flowed out from the eye of a spring, transforming into a faint mist that swirled around the cave. Zhu Yuan was silently seated on a boulder beside the spring. The roar of a dragon echoed from inside his body as a powerful suction force spread from his nose. One could only watch as the surging Genesis Chi transformed into white smoke that was sucked into Zhu Yuan's mouth and swallowed into his body. After doing this several times, the Genesis Chi in the cave became somewhat fainter. Only then did Zhu Yuan gradually come to a stop. He opened his eyes and looked towards the center of his right palm as he frowned slightly. A lump of heart-palpitating scarlet red sat there like the figure of a slightly sinister dragon. It was the dragon's resentment poison. Ever since Zhu Yuan took back the majority of Wu Huang's sacred dragon blessing, the dragon's resent poison in his body had grown stronger. Zhu Yuan could faintly feel that it was more domineering and violent than before. The dragon's resentment poison outbreak occurs once every 3 years, and the next 3-year date is fast approaching. Zhu Yuan sighed deeply. Time had passed by so quickly, and it was now nearly 3 years since then. When the previous dragon's resentment poison outbreak occurred, Zhu Yuan had yet to even unblock his 8 meridian channels. In contrast, he was now an Alpha Origin stage practitioner, an almighty force in the Great Zhu Empire. Though he had grown, the dragon's resentment poison in his body was likewise very different from before. Before it could be fully controlled, it would always be a potential danger. Zhu Yuan touched his palm as he mumbled to himself, "It seems that I have to think of a way to make the dragon's resentment poison work for me instead." The sacred dragon blessing was contained within the dragon's resent poison. If Zhu Yuan was unable to make the poison fully submit to him, he would be unable to properly bring out its powers. Thus, if he succeeded in this endeavor, it would give him an extremely lethal trump card. Zhu Yuan pondered about it for a moment before withdrawing his thoughts. There should still be some time before the dragon's resent poison outbreak, and the most important matter he had to deal with currently was still the battle with Cao Shi. Cao Shi was after all a veteran Gold Sash disciple, and a true blue 5th layer Alpha Origin practitioner. Such strength was not just a little bit better than Lu Feng. None of the people that could reach this level would be easy opponents. However, since Cao Shi had decided to block Zhu Yuan's way, he had no choice but to step over this stumbling block. But it must be acknowledged that the other party was an elite amongst the 5th layer Alpha Origin, someone who boasted overwhelming battle power. Hence, Zhu Yuan knew that he could not afford to underestimate this opponent. While Zhu Yuan was deep in thought, his hands suddenly came together as a ball of light floated out from his palm. Inside was an old book that seemed akin to the rising sun, giving off a scorching aura. It was the prize Zhu Yuan had received as the champion of the peak selection ceremony, the low-grade Heaven Genesis technique, the Heavenly Sun God record. Zhu Yuan's senses began to probe the ancient book, only opening his eyes a long time later. As expected of a true Heaven Genesis technique, it's going to be extremely complex and troublesome to practice. Zhu Yuan frowned. The power of the Heavenly Sun God record was indeed terrifying, far surpassing anything a little Heaven Genesis technique could muster. However, the conditions to learn it were exceedingly strict, likewise far beyond the difficulty of the little Heaven tier. To learn the Heavenly Sun God record, one required the assistance of external resources such as the 9 Suns crystal, the Heavenly Flames rock essence, and other similar items. All of them were pretty rare, and it would likely take quite some time to gather. After giving it some thought, Zhu Yuan kept away the book again. His match with Cao Shi was too close, and there was clearly no time to spend on the Heavenly Sun God record for the time being. It's a pity that the Genesis Marrow baptism needs 2 more months of preparation before it will be ready, or I would have been able to reach the next level through it. Zhu Yuan shook his head regretfully. The other prize from the peak selection ceremony was the Genesis Marrow baptism, but since the time was not right, he would not be able to utilize it for now. While Zhu Yuan was still mulling over the situation, he suddenly heard the sound of faint footsteps approaching. He turned his head, to find Yao Yao gracefully walking over with Tunton in her arms, while several jade bottles jung from between her slender fingers, giving off clinking sounds with each step. I can't believe that you managed to fall into such trouble after a single morning lesson. Yao Yao's red lips parted slightly, as she glared at Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan laughed helplessly, before replying with a sigh, "Can't do anything about it. New disciples have no reputation or influence, so no one is willing to accept me receiving benefits. Since someone has jumped out to offer himself up as an example for the rest, I have no choice but to go along." This was very normal. A new disciple would surely be bullied by the senior disciples for a period of time. It could be said to be a certain unspoken rule of sorts, but Zhu Yuan really did not have the time to bother with such things. If he wanted to accept the Purple Genesis cave dwelling with a clear conscience, he would have to first ensure all the other disciples had no objections, or it would only bring about more trouble in the future. To prevent such disputes, the most direct method was to display his strength and force the senior disciples to acknowledge him. Hence, even if Cao Shi had not provoked Zhu Yuan, he would have looked for some other avenue to display his prowess. Your opponent is a 5th layer Alpha Origin, don't end up getting beaten instead. Teased Yao Yao. Although she spoke in such a manner, she still tossed the 5 jade bottles towards Zhu Yuan. These were just delivered by Shen Wanjin. Zhu Yuan caught them and opened their caps. The thick, pungent smell of blood immediately dashed out, transforming into 5 beast silhouettes that gave off an aura filled with howling killing intent. These were obviously 5 bottles of Genesis Beast Essence blood, and appeared to be of pretty high quality, every one likely reaching grade 5. Joy flashed in Zhu Yuan's eyes as he could not help but praise, as expected of the inner mountains, you can even obtain grade 5 dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood here. He had tasked Shen Wanjin to station himself at the Glittering Jewels Pavilion with the goal of purchasing dragon-type Genesis Beast Essence blood. Zhu Yuan had originally predicted that he would end up with 2 bottles at most, but Shen Wanjin had ended up surprising him with 5. With these 5 bottles of Essence blood, his 9 dragons cannon would progress to the next level. You're pretty ambitious, take care not to end up overwhelmed by the savage aura if you refine too much Essence blood. Cautioned Yao Yao. Zhu Yuan touched the palm on his right hand as he grinned, no matter how savage they are, can they beat the dragon's resentment poison? He shook his head, speaking no further on this topic, as his gaze suddenly locked onto the creature lazily resting in Yaoyao's arms. An extremely kind and friendly smile appeared on his face as he asked, "Tunton, do you want to try the delicacies in the inner mountain 100 fragrances house?" The ears of the originally sleepy-looking Tunton immediately stood up as its excited gaze shot towards Zhu Yuan, even its tongue poking out from its mouth. Yao Yao shook her head in a slightly exasperated manner, as she threw Tunton out by its ear and said, "Unable to learn from your mistakes, you'll end up being sold off sooner or later." How could she not know that it would have to give its blood once it ate its fill? Zhu Yuan grinned widely as he picked up Tunton. "Big sis Yao Yao, tell the others that I will be secluding myself to cultivate, and won't be attending the next morning class." Yao Yao acknowledged before turning around to leave. The Dao Seeker Hall. It was the Shantai Yuan faction's turn to cultivate here again. When Cao Shi arrived, the first thing he saw was Zhu Yuan's empty seat. The former chuckled in amusement, evidently already aware of latter's secluded cultivation session. Resorting to such unnecessary measures, even though you only have a few short days. Cao Shi shook his head, a slight sneer and contempt flowing out in his eyes. Zhu Yuan, you've already shown all your cards during your fight with Lu Feng. If that's all you have, don't blame your senior brother for bullying you. Several of his gold sash disciple friends around him softly chuckled. Looks like there was going to be entertaining show in a few days. Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi's match still ended up causing some slight ripples in St. Genesis Mountain. However, the disciples under Lu Song and Lu Hong merely viewed it as a silly squabble that was not worth much attention. This was quite normal, because even in Elder Shen's group, there weren't many who fancied Zhu Yuan's chances even if he was the latest champion of the peak selection ceremony. At the end of the day, Cao Shi was a true blue veteran senior disciple of the 5th layer Alpha Origin stage, someone who was far stronger than Lu Feng. In the eyes of many of the senior disciples, Zhu Yuan was merely asking for trouble. While the many disciples held such thoughts, 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. Mist swirled around the pine trees, an enormous stone stage towering above them. At this current time, the vicinity of the stone stage was already filled with figures, even Shantai Yuan already here, seated above them. Today was the duel between Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi, and Elder Shen was naturally going to oversee it such as to prevent any accidents from occurring. Besides them, some of the disciples from the other two factions were also present, clearly waiting to enjoy the show. Of course, what they wanted to see was likely Zhu Yuan suffering. After all, he had been in the limelight too much recently, and was also the champion of the peak selection ceremony. However, he was also a new inner mountain disciple without enough experience. Thus, there were naturally people who were happy to see someone put him in his place. On one side of the stone stage, a smiling Cao Shi was surrounded by several disciples like a moon amongst the stars. He was pretty relaxed from the looks of it and clearly did not treat today's match seriously at all. A Genesis chi cloud flew over from far away, eventually landing on the opposite end of the stone stage. It was Zhu Yuan with Yao Yao at his side, graceful yet cold like an exiled goddess from the heavens, her breathtaking beauty drawing numerous gazes towards her. Teacher Shen. Zhu Yuan's gaze scanned his surroundings, sensing the amusement in many gazes. He ignored all of them as he looked towards Shantai Yuan and cupped his fists together. Shantai Yuan nodded in response, a rather complicated look on his face. He truly did have high hopes for Zhu Yuan's potential, which was why he did not wish to see him clashing with Cao Shi at such a time. However, he also understood that it was because he regarded Zhu Yuan with too much importance that the senior disciples were now unhappy, leading them to make things difficult for Zhu Yuan. But why couldn't these fools just stop for a moment and question themselves instead? If they had shown a little more worth, wouldn't he have no need to place all his bets on a single person? If Zhu Yuan lost today's duel, he would surely have to give in for a period of time and keep a low profile, losing all hopes of obtaining the purple Genesis cave dwelling. Without such cultivation resources, it would undoubtedly become even more difficult for him to catch up with the veteran purple sash disciples. With such feelings churning in his heart, Shantai Yuan ultimately sighed inside, nodding to Zhu Yuan before turning towards Cao Shi. This is a match between our own people, make sure you understand when to stop. Cao Shi laughed a relaxed manner and replied, "Don't worry Teacher Shen, I'm a senior after all and will show mercy." The moment he finished, his figure moved, landing at the center of the stone stage as he cast playful gaze towards Zhu Yuan and said, "Junior brother Zhu Yuan, you can avoid any suffering if you admit defeat now. It's never a pretty sight when it comes to punches and kick after all." Zhu Yuan ignored the former, also landing in the center of the stage. He stood opposite Cao Shi, his face akin to a still ancient well. When their gazes met, iciness flashed within their eyes. Below Shantai Yuan, the purple sash disciples were also watching. Zhongyang wore a slight smile on his face as he said towards Ju Tai, senior brother Ju Tai, this junior brother of ours does have potential, but he has a bit of a rebellious streak, and doesn't follow the rules. I hope that he will be able to better behave after today, and at the very least understand that he should be more respectful towards us senior brothers. Ju Tai frowned upon hearing this. He was a gentle and magnanimous person, and although his talent was not exceptional, he did possess a substantial amount of influence amongst the disciples. He could sense the happiness in Shen Taiyuan due to Ju Yuan's arrival, happiness that in turn made Ju Tai blame himself and feel somewhat ashamed. Teacher Shen would not feel this way if he had been more capable as the first disciple. Thus, he showed goodwill towards Ju Yuan, because he genuinely hoped that someone amazing would arise from their group. However, this mindset was clearly not shared by all the other disciples. Zhongyang, for instance, disliked how much attention Teacher Shen was showing Ju Yuan. Although Cao Shi appeared to be the mastermind, Zhongyang was likely sparing no effort to support the former. Ju Tai also knew that junior brother Zhongyang did not truly acknowledge him as the first disciple, because the latter's talent was greater than his own. Although Zhongyang had joined later, he was fast catching up with his senior brother. Hence, he was usually not too respectful either when they met. Junior brother Zhongyang, junior brother Ju Yuan has great potential, and it can be said to be our fortune that he has come to St. Genesis Peak and Teacher Shen's faction. The cultivation resources we give him now will surely be returned many-fold in the future, said Ju Tai. Zhongyang maintained his smiling appearance, though a sneer flashed in his eyes. Senior brother Ju Tai's words may be slightly exaggerated. I do not deny that he does have potential, but I'm afraid that he is not qualified to be considered our fortune. So what if he's the champion of the peak selection ceremony? Would it cement his gradual ascent to one of the 10 great chosens? It's not like we haven't seen any champions of the peak selection ceremony before, and quite a few of them only end up as purple sash disciples after entering the inner mountains, making them no different from any of us. Ju Tai frowned and said, Teacher Shen naturally has his reasons for placing such high hopes in Ju Yuan. Then we'll wait and see. Zhongyang did not comment, his eyes narrowing slightly as he gazed at Ju Yuan's figure on the stone stage, and said in a neither hurried nor slow manner, I hope that you can still have such a mindset after this match. No matter how much potential he has, it is irrelevant till the day he turns that potential into strength. As for now, I feel that it would be best for him to behave a little better. A little suffering may not always be a bad thing for youngsters. While they were conversing, Shen Taiyuan's gaze swept across the stone stage as he said in a solemn voice, begin. Rumble. The instant the word left his mouth, an astonishing wave of Genesis Chi abruptly exploded from Cao Shi's body, like pillar of smoke as it charged into the clouds. Cao Shi's Genesis Chi was akin to silver snow and gave off an extremely sharp aura. As it surged past, tears were left in the air. Genesis Chi pressure spread from his body, like an enormous mountain crushing Ju Yuan from above. The expressions of numerous disciples in the vicinity turned a little graver when they felt this pressure. The fact that Cao Shi had been able to stably occupy the gold sash third seat previously was proof of his ability. Such abundant and concentrated Genesis Chi was a force to be reckoned with even amongst the fifth layer Alpha origin. Ju Yuan's eyes widened a little. The Genesis Chi pressure from Cao Shi was not just a little stronger than Lu Feng. Cao Shi laughed playfully when he saw Ju Yuan's expression. Junior brother Ju Yuan, you were the one who suggested this match a few days ago. Can it be that you no longer have the courage you had back then? Ju Yuan's expression was indifferent as gold Genesis Chi dashed out from the top of his head, hovering in the air like a giant halo. The faint silhouette of a titanic python emerged from within and hissed. He stared at Cao Shi as a sharp and serious look gradually flooded his eyes. A split second later, Ju Yuan's aura changed, like a blade that had been unsheathed, no longer hiding its sharp, cold edge. Come, show me what's so amazing about our senior gold sash disciples. The instant his words faded, his figure had already shot forward, surging Genesis Chi whizzing in his wake. Every gaze in the vicinity of the stone stage was attentively watching. They too wanted to know whether the champion of the peak selection ceremony, Ju Yuan, had the qualifications to be regarded so highly by Teacher Shen. Golden Genesis Chi swept outwards as 100 feet tall torrent of Genesis Chi roared, seemingly transforming into a furious python that ferociously pounced at Cao Shi. However, Cao Shi merely sneered as he slammed his foot into the ground. Silver snow like Genesis Chi also whizzed forth along with an indescribable sharpness, an iciness, as it met the golden Genesis Chi head-on. The two torrents of Genesis Chi collided, causing a shockwave of destruction to unfurl. Gashes were torn open on the ground while also being bombarded full of holes. The silver snow-like Genesis Chi was clearly the greater force of the two. After all, Kaosha was at the fifth layer alpha origin, and the quantity and concentration of his Genesis Chi were both greater than Zhu Yuan's. However, Zhu Yuan's Genesis Chi was of a high grade and extremely troublesome to deal with. This was why the silver snow-like Genesis Chi ended up taking quite some time to completely obliterate the golden Genesis Chi. The instant the golden Genesis Chi was destroyed, a phantom-like figure appeared behind Kaosha, as the shadow of a brush rapidly grew, its snow-white hairs instantly turning into thousands of icy needles that shot towards Kaosha's fatal spots. "I've already studied all of your tactics." Kaosha snorted as needles that flickered with cold light shot towards him from behind. With a grasp of his hand, a metal baton that was forged from silver appeared in his hand. Numerous runes had been carved into its body, making it shine icily when Genesis Chi was poured in. The silver baton made a sweeping motion behind him, Genesis Chi whizzing along with it as it tore through the air, blowing away every single one of the needles. Iciness flashed in Kaosha's eyes. He understood the principle of pushing the advantage, and abruptly shot forth, Genesis Chi pouring into the metal baton, as it transformed into countless baton shadows that seemed to fill the sky as they ruthlessly swung at Zhu Yuan. Every baton shadow was terrifyingly violent, and even a fourth-layer alpha origin practitioner would only be able to retreat. The heavenly Yuan brush in Zhu Yuan's hand also began to dance as countless brush shadows emerged one after another. Golden Genesis Chi swirled around each shadow, the brush tips pulsing with lethal sharpness, as they clashed with the numerous baton shadows. Sparks continued to fly with each loud clang along with a mini-explosion of berserk Genesis Chi. In the vicinity of the stone stage, numerous gazes watched the two figures that rapidly crisscrossed. Junior brother Zhu Yuan's is pretty feisty to match blow for blow. Zhong Yang chuckled, though a faint sliver of mockery could be heard in his voice. Anyone could tell that Kaosha had the advantage in Genesis Chi, making it such that the advantage would clearly lean in his favor in a direct clash. Everyone could see that all of Zhu Yuan's counterattacks were being smashed apart by the baton shadows. Zhu Tai frowned, but did not say anything though his lips began to purse tightly. Powerful winds swept outwards as the final baton shadow and brush shadow collided. The ground cracked as Zhu Yuan's figure jerked back slightly, before shooting back in retreat. Kaosha sneered, not giving Zhu Yuan any time to catch his breath, as the former ferociously pounced forward once again. Silver baton shadows that contained the power to split mountains viciously smashed towards Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yuan's figure suddenly etherealized when he saw this, rapidly drifting back like the mist as he avoided Kaosha's chase. Kaosha tried to follow several times, but was unable to even touch a corner of Zhu Yuan's clothes. Zhu Yuan's ethereal form technique was clearly even more proficient than before. "Scurrying away like a rat again?" mocked Kaosha. Soon after, an icy light flashed in his eyes as he said, "Don't think that you can escape just because you practice the ethereal form technique. You underestimate the inner mountain gold sash disciples. Little heaven Genesis technique, spatial teleportation." Silver light suddenly stretched out from under his feet as he stepped onto it. The instant Kaosha's foot landed, his body seemed to ignore the laws of space, appearing directly behind Zhu Yuan as the metal baton in his hand viciously swung towards along with a 100-foot-tall pillar of Genesis Chi. Little heaven Genesis technique, mounter opening baton. With a furious shout, the metal baton swept downwards in an unstoppable manner. The expressions of several gold sash disciples turned grave, not daring to underestimate this attack. Zhu Yuan's eyes widened a little as the alarming force rapidly descended from above. Kaosha's strength had somewhat exceeded the former's expectations. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed as a cold and serious look exploded within them. His hands tightened around the heavenly Yuan brush, as the magical python scales emerged on his skin, rapidly raising his strength. "Heavenly Yuan brush, million whale rune." He yelled in his heart, as he ferociously swung the heavenly Yuan brush. Golden Genesis Chi exploded into a burst of dazzling light, as the faint cry of a whale echoed. The air was blasted apart, the ground instantly crumbling, unable to bear such power. The power of this strike also caused the expressions of several disciples to change slightly. Baton and brush smashed into each other again, as a thunderous clang was heard. Boom! A shockwave of berserk Genesis Chi unfurled, destabilizing numerous disciples nearby. Shen Taiyuan waved his sleeve, completely quelling the shockwaves that had left the confines of the stone stage. Only then did the numerous disciples hastily look towards the stage. A crack had appeared at the center of the giant stone stage, as if splitting it into two. On both sides of the crack, Zhu Yuan and Cao Shi's figures were being flung backwards. The heavenly Yuan brush's tip left a trail of sparks on the ground, before Zhu Yuan stabilized his figure with a stomp, his expression indifferent as he looked to his front where Cao Shi was staring back with a somewhat stormy face. The counterattack Zhu Yuan had suddenly unleashed earlier had been surprisingly ferocious, managing to block what Cao Shi had thought to be a sure kill blow. No wonder you're so confident. You do have some ability. Cao Shi sneered. Zhu Yuan's expression remained unchanged, merely staring at Cao Shi as he slowly said, "The limits of your strength doesn't seem to go too deep either." Cao Shi's eyes hardened as a smile of contempt rose from the corners of his mouth. "You seem to be saying that you were probing me earlier." These words immediately caused strange looks to rise on the face of the numerous disciples around the stone stage. They merely took it as Zhu Yuan being reluctant to admit the truth, because Cao Shi had clearly taken the advantage in their previous clash. However, Zhu Yuan paid no attention to these gazes. He slowly released his grip on the heavenly Yuan brush, an uncaring expression on his face as he said, "Since this is all you amount to, it will be enough." Cao Shi disdainfully said, "Stop acting. If you still have any rationality, you should admit defeat as soon as possible. I cannot guarantee your safety if we continue." His words did not draw any answer from Zhu Yuan. The latter was currently slowly placing his hands together, as violent undulations suddenly pulsed from the Genesis Chi in his body. Rumble. Vigorous Genesis Chi dashed into the sky from the top of his head, the roars of beasts echoing as a faint aura of savagery and violence filled the area. 4 Genesis Chi pillars revolved above Zhu Yuan's head, each one roughly 100 feet tall. The silhouettes of beasts took shape within them, giving off an aura of wildness and ferocity. The 9 dragons cannon. A sneer rose from the corners of Cao Shi's mouth when he saw this. He had already investigated Zhu Yuan's techniques, and naturally knew that this was the technique he had used to defeat Lu Feng. "Do you think that I'm Lu Feng? You plan on beating me with your 4-dragon level 9 dragons cannon?" Cao Shi let out an icy laugh. Zhu Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly, before he suddenly took in a deep breath, as a ruthless look flitted across his eyes. The flickering Genesis Chi stars in his Chi dwelling suddenly began to tremble violently as all the Genesis Chi stored within them was being fully squeezed out by Zhu Yuan at this moment. Rumble. Boundless Genesis Chi flowed through the channels inside Zhu Yuan's body like a flood. It was at this instant that another giant Genesis Chi pillar rose into the sky from the top of Zhu Yuan's head, quickly splitting into 4 as an sky-shaking roar thundered. 9 dragons cannon, 8 dragons. Roar. 4 even larger Genesis Chi pillars spun as they roared. A savage aura saturated the area, causing the sky to take on a dim red hue. The expressions of the numerous disciples in the vicinity of the stone stage abruptly changed at this moment. Shock filled their eyes as they gazed at the right beast-shaped Genesis Chi hovering above Zhu Yuan. Alarm flashed across their faces, clearly having sensed the power of these 8 Genesis Chi pillars. The mocking smile on Cao Shi's face slowly turned rigid, disbelief surging out in his eyes as he said in a shrill voice, 8 dragons. Your 9 dragons cannon has reached the 8 dragons level. He was pretty much overwhelmed by astonishment. One must know that Zhu Yuan's 9 dragons cannon had only just reached the 4 dragons level in his battle against Lu Feng half a month ago. How had it suddenly shot to 8? 8 dragons was already considered the advanced stage, wielding power that went far beyond the 4 dragons level. One must know that even amongst the inner mountain disciples, only a rare handful had managed to reach the 8 dragons level. What Cao Shi did not know was that Zhu Yuan had originally planned on preparing 9 dragons for the former. However, the latter had failed after reaching 8 dragons, because the Genesis Chi in his body was unable to sustain the 9th Genesis Chi beast figure. Zhu Yuan could not be bothered with any useless exchange of words, and had no intention of dragging the battle any longer after getting a grasp of Cao Shi's strength. Zhu Yuan had after all used his secluded cultivation session to specially prepare this trump card for Cao Shi. Hence, Zhu Yuan merely stared coldly at Cao Shi. Roar. 8 Genesis Chi beast figures roared at the heavens as an explosion of savageness swept outwards. A split second later, all of them abruptly shot forth, their giant shadows enveloping Cao Shi as his expression changed drastically. Have a taste of the sumptuous feast I've prepared for you. 8 Genesis Chi beasts roared as they wreaked havoc, their savage auras churning. The sky darkened as a strong stench blew past, causing dread to rise in anyone who saw this sight. No one had expected Zhu Yuan to suddenly unleash such a terrifying trump card. Similarly, no one had expected Zhu Yuan's 9 dragons cannon to reach this level. At one side of the stone stage, Zhong Yang's expression turned slightly rigid. The turn of events on the stage had exceeded his expectations. Zhu Yuan's counterattack was indeed formidable, causing a chill to rise in one's heart. No one knew whether Cao Shi would be able to withstand such an attack. In the vicinity of the stone stage, tense gaze after gaze watched the battle unfurl within it. Cao Shi's face had turned extremely grave. He could sense the ferocity of the 8 roaring Genesis Chi beasts, the pressure he felt making his scalp turn numb. However, he understood that he could not retreat at this point, a fierce and resolute look flashing in his eyes. So what if it's 8 dragons? I refuse to believe a second layer alpha origin like you will be able to bring out all of its power. Cao Shi gritted his teeth. You're just putting up an act, appearing powerful on the outside, but in reality empty on the inside. His palms abruptly slammed into each other as the Genesis Chi in his body began to circulate without holding anything back. Rumble. Silver snow-like Genesis Chi swept out from the top of his head like a giant silver dragon. It coiled in the sky above him, the swirling Genesis Chi taking on the shape of a silver halo. The halo slowly revolved. A split second later, the cries of millions of swords suddenly rang out from within it. The numerous disciples watched as countless silver sword shadows spilled out from the halo, filling the entire sky. High-grade Little Heaven Genesis technique, melody of the sword sea. Countless silver sword shadows shot forth like an endless sea of blades, their cries converging together, before sweeping across the area. The sharpness they gave off seemingly piercing even space itself. At the sight of Cao Shi's counterattack, the expressions of numerous disciples changed slightly, turning a little grave. Senior brother Cao Shi is going all out, and has even used the melody of the sword sea. That's his most powerful trump card. The crowd was practically glued to the fight. It was clear that Zhu Yuan's counterattack had made Cao Shi feel danger. Thus, he no longer dared to hold anything back, directly activating his strongest technique. It was time to see whose trump card was stronger. Under the attention of countless glowing eyes, the sword sea surged past, ultimately crashing into the Genesis Chi beasts. Rumble. A shockwave of Genesis Chi swept outwards, ripping tear after tear in the stone stage. The first Genesis Chi beast only lasted for a dozen breaths, before being shredded to pieces by the sea of swords. The second beast quickly followed up, but was soon torn to shreds. In the short span of a few dozen breaths, the ferocious Genesis Chi beasts were slaughtered one after another. This scene stunned many disciples, clearly surprised that the seemingly powerful Genesis Chi beasts would end up being so pathetic. Why is this happening? Even Ju Tai could not help but ask. The 9 dragons cannon and melody of the sword sea were both high-grade Little Heaven Genesis techniques. The former should not have been broken through so quickly, right? Zhong Yang's taunt face finally relaxed slightly, as he began to smile. It seems that junior brother Zhu Yuan's Genesis Chi cannot match up. He's after all only at the second layer alpha origin stage. Many disciples nodded in agreement. They had originally believed Zhu Yuan's counter-attack to be pretty deadly, but it turns out that it was only a false front. In the vicinity of the stone stage, only Yao Eiro's pretty face remained unchanged. Of course, Shen Taiyuan's gaze was also flickering slightly, a look of thought on his face. Ha ha, junior brother Zhu Yuan, is this all you amount to? Cao Shi laughed loudly at this moment, the worry from before already gone completely as he ridiculed. The 9 dragons cannon has become the 9 worms cannon in your hands. He was under the impression that Zhu Yuan's Genesis Chi had been lacking, and had just barely managed to use the 9 dragons cannon. This led to his Genesis Chi being more scattered than usual, making the 8 Genesis Chi beasts appear strong on the outside, while in actuality mere husks on the inside. Hence, a single touch was all that was needed to blow them apart. However, Zhu Yuan remained impassive in response to the former's taunting mockery. With a thought, the remaining Genesis Chi beasts continued to charge forward in a ferocious manner. Boom. Boom. However, the outcome was still the same. Genesis Chi beast after beast was being slashed to shreds by the sea of sword. In the blink of an eye, only specks of scattered Genesis Chi remained of the first 7 beasts, leaving only the final one floating in the air. I shall finish this in one go. Junior brother Zhu Yuan, you'd better behave better in future. With a cry from Cao Shi, the seemingly endless sea of swords swept forth, shooting straight at the last Genesis Chi beast. Once the last Genesis Chi beast was torn to shreds, Zhu Yuan's attack would not know more, deciding the victor of this battle. The sea of swords buzzed loudly as they rushed towards the final Genesis Chi beast. The 8th Genesis Chi beast coiled in the sky, its shape similar to that of a python. At this current moment, it seemed to be trembling faintly. A pair of tightly shut snake eyes slowly opened at this moment. The instant they opened, berserk and ferocious Genesis Chi suddenly erupted. Rumble. The originally 100 feet tall Genesis Chi pillar abruptly began to swell, reaching over 500 feet. The power of this Genesis Chi beast was even stronger than all of its 7 predecessors. What? The power pulsing from the Genesis Chi instantly astonished numerous disciples, filling their faces with confusion. They could not understand why the final Genesis Chi beast would be so powerful. Zhongyang's expression also changed slightly as he fell into thought for a brief moment. His heart immediately shuddered as the expression in his eyes fluctuated. Zhu Yuan is really cunning. The reason why the previous 7 beasts were so weak was not because Zhu Yuan's Genesis Chi was insufficient, but because he had intentionally gathered the majority of his power in the 8th Genesis Chi beast. On the other hand, Cao Shi spent a great amount of energy with the intention of finishing this in one fell sweep, causing him to exhaust quite a substantial amount of Genesis Chi up till this point. However, all he had achieved was blasting apart a few empty husks. Zhu Yuan's true killing blow was hidden in the 8th beast. Roar! Gasp after gasp was heard as the 8th beast roared. It opened its giant maw, seemingly appearing to block out the sky as it lunged towards the Sea of Swords. A single gulp was all it took to instantly swallow the Sea of Swords. The silver sword shadows that had entered the Genesis Chi beast's body were instantly destroyed by the savage power inside. Everyone was stunned, including Cao Shi. How can this be? Why is this Genesis Chi beast so strong? Cao Shi's complexion had turned deathly pale. Just moments ago, he had believed victory to be already in his grasp, but who could have expected such a reversal to happen in the blink of an eye? It felt akin to being thrown out of the heavens. The surroundings of the stone stage was silent as numerous disciples looked at each other. They too were surprised by such a turn of events. Zhongyang's expression fluctuated indeterminately, his brows tightly furrowed together. He had likewise been certain of Cao Shi's victory. An expressionless Zhu Yuan gazed at Cao Shi and waved his sleeve. The final Genesis Chi beast suddenly roared as it ferociously pounced towards the latter, making him hastily retreat in terror. The savage aura that assaulted his face made Cao Shi's heart shiver. The sight of Zhu Yuan's cold gaze making his heart shudder even more violently, as he hurriedly yelled, I admit defeat. If he was hit by the Genesis Chi beast, he would surely be heavily injured. The instant the words left his mouth, the Genesis Chi beast that was only a few feet away suddenly exploded, the berserk shockwave blowing Cao Shi several steps back. Zhu Yuan cast an indifferent glance at the panicked Cao Shi, as he let out a long drawn-out breath. The Genesis Chi around his body gradually receded, seemingly thinner than before. It was clear that the 8th dragon of the 9 dragons canon earlier had depleted his Genesis Chi. This was something everyone could see, but no one dared to say anything this time. The strength Zhu Yuan had just displayed made them feel a chill rise in their hearts. Zhu Yuan was after all still at the 2nd layer Alpha Origin stage, but even the 5th layer Cao Shi had suffered greatly at the former's hands. Such battle power was terrifying. Moreover, the current Zhu Yuan was obviously even stronger than he was during the peak selection ceremony. Such rapid progress made one's heart shiver involuntarily. Thanks for letting me win. Zhu Yuan cupped his fists together with a calm expression. Fear and anger interlaced on Cao Shi's face that was not a pretty sight to look at currently. Such an outcome was something he had never even considered. Around the stone stage, all the disciples stared at Zhu Yuan in amazement regardless of what faction they hailed from. There was no longer any gazes that questioned his actions, now replaced by a sliver of wariness. In the past, numerous senior disciples had not thought much of this champion of the peak selection ceremony. Zhu Yuan was after all just a new disciple, and titles meant little. However, Zhu Yuan had now proven his worth to them. In the silence, Shen Taiyuan stroked his beard, a gratified smile appearing on his strict and aged face. Zhu Yuan's victory had also somewhat exceeded his expectations. He had originally been under the impression that Zhu Yuan was merely being rash, especially since youngsters were quite easily provoked. But from what he could see now, it was clear that he had underestimated Zhu Yuan. He softly chuckled as his gaze swept towards his disciples. Understood. Zhu Yuan cupped his fists and responded. Shantai Yuan and the rest of the new disciples cheered in excitement. Zhu Yuan battle made them feel proud as fellow new disciples. The corners of Zhong Yang's mouth twitched when he saw this. He knew that with this battle, Zhu Yuan had established a place for himself in the inner mountains. In the future, it was likely that not many disciples would respond if anyone were to attempt suppressing Zhu Yuan based on seniority. After all, the strength Zhu Yuan had displayed in this battle was enough to convince everyone. He glanced at the deathly pale Cao She, and could only curse inside. Useless. He had originally intended for Cao She to show Zhu Yuan his place, and lessen his value in Shantai Yuan's eyes. However, it had all been ruined by Cao She. Zhu Yuan had ultimately managed to solidify his position. This video will end here.